Greetings, everybody. How you doing? This is Kinesiology 214. This presentation will look into fascia lines. Um, the way the human body is made up, we've talked about how there's a whole series of different interconnected components and systems within the body. Fascia lines are an example of this. There are 12 main fascia lines that all kind of that run through the body and connect everything in the body. And today we'll shine a light on those. We'll explain those a little bit. I'm not going to go too far into depth. I don't want to overwhelm you. But with fascia work, it is something where you could easily spend half a semester talking about these lines and how they integrate into the body. Now, one of the key kind of watershed moments, and there's other people who have researched fascia lines and interconnectivity within the human body. But really the person that brought it to light in the profession is a gentleman by the name of Thomas Myers. He has a wonderful book named Anatomy Trains. There's a whole bunch of different videos, and actually I have one of them that I uploaded for you guys to review that he has on his website, and also there are just a bunch of seminars and clinics that he offers through his organization. So when you look at the fascia lines in the body, it's an interconnected series of muscles through fascia. And when you look at the human body, I've talked about the way the body kind of processes stress that's placed upon it. And stress is applied to the human organism and it's offloaded to different parts of the human organism. So like in working out, you're working out with weights, there's a particular load you place on the body. Well, that load is offloaded not exclusively to one area, but it's actually distributed across the entire human organism. And so it's the muscles that do the work, yes, of course, but it's also the connective tissue that attaches bone to bone, muscle to bone, and that helps to make the movement happen. And so these stresses are transferred not only from muscle to muscle, if you will, or muscle fiber, but muscle to bone, muscle to ligament, bone to bone, through tendon, etc. And through tendons and ligaments, excuse me, because ligaments connect bones and tendons connect muscle to bone. So think of it like a system that processes stress. And the way this is described is this tension plus integrity model, which is, I have such trouble saying it, TENS gritty, TENS gritty. I always like to call it TENS gritty. What the idea is, the human body is held together through a series of balancing forces, right? And it's compression on one side and it's tension on the other side. And so when you look at what is actually carrying the tension, it's the fascia, and it's the fascia lines that go through the body that help kind of hold everything together. And if you ever see these models online and you hit like these GIF models, on those, when they compress these things, you can see literally how the work is offloaded to other areas of the model itself. It's really cool stuff, and I urge you to go out and take a look for these different types of models. You can literally Google this and you'll find just a ton of them. You can get lost down a rabbit hole with those. So if we look at the image to the right, this is one of the fascia lines. Let me get my face out of the way here. This is one of the fascia lines in the body. Back functional line or functional back line, both are synonymous, both are the same. I picked this just off of researchgate.net. And when you look at this picture, you can see the musculature it's involved, right? Well, it looks like glutes on one side and lats on the other. And you'll also hear the term serrape effect in terms of like this crossing effect around the front side of the body. When you look at this fascia line, the thing that stands out the most is it actually wraps from one side of the body and connects on the side of the thigh, on the posterior aspect of the thigh, around up through the glute and across the body to the opposite arm. So just kind of think about in terms of human movement patterns that might be involved that are cross-body posterior chain or in the functional back line. And you can kind of look at this and go, all right, this is part of a much bigger picture now, and this is a good example of a person might have some dysfunction in one area of the body, but it's actually affecting another and manifesting itself in a different area of the body. So it becomes like this process of evaluating human movement, kind of evaluating how the human body is actually made. And you can kind of look at this and go, all right, well, if a person has an issue up in their right lat, you might have issues anywhere along this fascia line down to the left glute, down to the left lateral aspect of the leg. And so you start to look at it in terms of, IT band work, perhaps there's other stuff on the backside of the body we need to work in the glutes. There might be an issue in the glutes itself, or there might be something going on in the series of muscles going up into the lats, and actually the lats where they attach into the humerus. So, think of this again as like that series of muscles that are all interconnected to make movement happen. And where it becomes a little bit more apparent is when you compare two different fascia lines side by side. So if I go ahead and tap this over to the next screen, we have our buddy over here who was on the previous screen. I tuck myself down here kind of in the corner. And you look at the picture to the left versus the picture to the right. The picture to the left, the muscles there, literally go from splenius capitis, the base of the skull, all the way down the back of the body in a very linear fashion, down through the pelvis, into the hamstrings, biceps femoris, down into the calves, down into the sole of the foot. Think of the movement patterns that these muscles over here on the left-hand side, what kind of movement patterns would be involved with that? It'd be very much sagittal plane type movements, absolutely. And you're talking sagittal plane movements where it's more extension oriented. Now, the movements over here to the right, because it's a cross body, that's serrape effect, you're going to have more multi-plane type movements that include rotational type activities. So now you start to kind of look at the human body as a unit in these different fascia lines. And this lecture is not to be exhaustive. This is like just a brief overview. And you think of the actual, and the terminology is the functional contractile path of that fascia line. How does the functional contractile path on the left differ than the one on the right? What are the movement patterns you would see over here on the left-hand side versus the ones on the right? And to that end, it allows you to actually be a better practitioner in evaluating human movement and perhaps being able to evaluate deficiencies in human movement. A person who sits all day, they're stuck in a chair, they're sitting there typing away on their keyboard, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They're going to have different loading parameters and different stressors placed on this functional line than this functional line. Conversely, somebody who maybe works in a factory where they're working in a movement pattern where they have a repetitive movement pattern over and over and over as part of their activities of daily living might be overloading a fascia line on this example versus this example. So dig in when you start working with people and start getting an idea of what type of movement patterns they normally do and what might be overloaded. And you can look at this and kind of go, okay, well, in terms of working out, am I really overloading one particular fascia line and one particular series of musculature, right? And this one functional contractile path over and over and over and over again by doing the same activities in the same plane of movement. And I'm not doing, like, this is a wonderful example that we have on the screen here, where you have two very different planes of movement, one very sagittal, one very multi-plane movement. And so you have to look at this in terms of a practitioner, in terms of how you program your people so you're not overloading continually in one plane of movement or the other, okay? So if I go ahead and let's jump onto the next screen here. The link I put a link out to one of the pictures I had in the previous screen, so please use that to take yourself out to another rabbit hole. But this is the book to the right by Thomas Myers. I highly, highly, highly advise, if you're going to be a movement practitioner, especially physical therapy or personal training, get this book. As a strength and conditioning coach, you will use things from this book, but your training methodology is going to be specific to the sport, whereas in the general population, you'll be looking at loading parameters for the general population in terms of how you train people will be a little bit different than if you were a strength and conditioning coach. A physical therapist, this is actually a great book to have because it gives you such a perspective, a different perspective on things. So if you go out to this link I provided here, it's anatomytrains.com, you'll find just a ton of information. Give yourself an hour just to dig through all the stuff, just to kind of get acquainted and then go from there. All right, guys, as I mentioned, I didn't want this to be exhaustive and I didn't want to get on some wild tangent regarding fascia lines. I want you to be very aware that they're there. I want you to be aware that there's not just one, but you have multiple. You have 12 of these things. They are multiplane, multi-joint, and they are in essence the functional line of contractile activity you see in the human body. So with that, guys, I am taking off. You guys have a good one.